All right, Ji, welcome back. And we were talking about costs of evidence-based practices. And when we talk about costs of evidence-based practices, so the cost is basically associated with three levels: the organizational level costs, the leaders who are going to bear the cost, and the members of the followers who are going to bear the cost. When we talk about the organizational cost perspectives, तो obviously उसमें organization को अपने physical और tangible resources को utilize करना है, अपना time spend करना है. तो as I was telling you कि इसमें सिर्फ आपके physiological structural costs नहीं होती हैं, इसमें बेशुमार आपकी psychological and opportunity costs जो हैं वो भी involve होती हैं. Likewise, the organizations they need to go for unlearning because बाज़ औक़ात हमारी learning के अंदर कुछ ऐसे पॉइंट्स आ जाते हैं, कुछ ऐसे बॉटलनेक्स आ जाते हैं जो कि हमें अपग्रेड होने से, मॉडर्नाइज होने से, डेवलप करने से वो रोक रहे होते हैं. तो you have to unlearn all those phenomena which are the stories of the past, and you have to come up with the newness and the new perspectives जिससे कि हम बेहतर evidences के साथ अपनी development को ensure वो कर सकें. When we talk about the costs associated with the leaders, so there is a certain degree of transparency associated with the leaders. So they have to come up with a transparent decision-making, transparent transactions, and obviously data-driven versus intuitional perspective के ऊपर बहस चलेगी कि they have to decide based upon not just their intuition, but with the evidence which is obviously coming out of the data and analysis. So वो सारी चीजें जो होंगी, they would be incurring certain costs. And likewise, when we talk about the members and the followers, so the cost which they are going to bear is more or less linked with their behavioral shift. Okay, because they have to come up with the behavior modification, they have to come up with the right attitude development, which is always focusing upon finding out the evidence for the decision making, creativity and innovation. इन तमाम बातों के बरक्स जब हम benefits की बात करें तो obviously the organization is going to have benefits in terms of profitability, productivity and satisfaction of the stakeholders. The leaders are going to have the benefit in terms of their credibility, their trustworthiness and obviously their goodwill, and the members and followers are going to have their benefit in terms of satisfaction, engagement, involvement and obviously their career development. तो ये तमाम benefits हैं जो उस evidence based practice से इन तीनों levels के ऊपर हमें achieve वो होंगे. At the same time, these are not just the benefits and the costs associated. हमारे पास there are certain challenges which we have to face. For example, sometimes the people are lacking the right ability to analyze the things. So there would be lack of analytical skill. There might be lack of execution skills. There might be lack of critical appraisal. और ये चीजें हमारे लिए bottlenecks create करेंगी, conditions and constraints develop करेंगी to move towards our success. So a better manager would be, a better leader would be जो कि इन तमाम obstacles को overcome करना वो जानता हो, अपने आप को upgrade और update करना जानता हो, जो इस बात पर अपना फोकस रखे कि किस तरीके से उससे ना कि सिर्फ अपनी जात को बल्कि अपने साथ वाबस्ता तमाम लोगों को भी सक्सेस की तरफ, डेवलपमेंट की तरफ, बेटरमेंट की तरफ वो लेकर जाना है. So if we talk about the future of evidence-based management, as Rob B. Briner and Niall D. Walsh are talking about, the future of evidence-based management would start from when you will be there to think out of the box. क्योंकि जब तक आप अपने आप को एक restricted phenomena के अंदर रखोगे, जब तक आप अपनी सोच को एक बड़े कैनवस के ऊपर एस्टैब्लिश नहीं करवाओगे, तब तक आपके लिए डिफिकल्ट हो जाएगा कि आप अनलर्न करते हुए नए एंड मॉडर्न तकाजों को लर्न वो एट द सेम टाइम वो कर सको. अब अनलर्न करने में ये बात जरूरी नहीं है कि यू हैव टू अनलर्न ईच एंड एवरीथिंग. अनलर्निंग फिनोमेना में याद रखिएगा कि आपको अनलर्न ऑब्वियसली उन्हीं ऑर्थोडॉक्स चीजों को करना है, आपको अनलर्न ऑब्वियसली उन्हीं आउटडेटेड चीजों को करना है which are causing troubles, constraints, conditions, bottlenecks for you. Because think out of the box ऑब्वियसली ज्यादा प्रैक्टिकल नजर तब आता है जब आपने इनसाइड द बॉक्स सारा कुछ एक्सप्लोर कर लिया हो. हम इस गलतफहमी के शिकार भी ना रहें कि वी हैव नॉट इन्वेस्टिगेटेड एंड एक्सप्लोर्ड द बॉक्स एंड वी आर जस्ट ट्राइंग टू गो आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स. तो अब ऑब्वियसली जो सीक्रेट्स, जो रियलिटीज बॉक्स के अंदर हैं, हम उनके बारे में नाआशना हो जाएंगे. सो वी हैव टू बी विजिलेंट, वी हैव टू बी एजाइल. अगर हम सारी बात को समराइज करें तो वी हैव टू बी विजिलेंट, वी हैव टू बी एजाइल एंड वी शुड बी रेडी टू एक्सेप्ट द न्यू रियलिटीज being explored and being known to us. Excuse me. So when we talk about future of evidence-based management, it is said that use of evidence in decision-making is becoming norm of the day. The people are asking for reasons and logics. The people are asking for scientific methodologies. The people are asking for like questions to you. People are not in the modern world, they are not just are being silent and obeying what you say. They ask you questions, they ask you why, they ask you how, they ask you what. Okay, so आपको एविडेंस को बेस बनाना है अपने तमाम एस्पेक्ट्स को डिस्कस करने के लिए. सो यूज ऑफ एविडेंस इन ऑर्गेनाइजेशनल लीडरशिप, ऑब्वियसली लीडरशिप के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी जब तक लीडर के पास किसी बात का एविडेंस नहीं है, उसके पास कोई प्रैक्टिस नहीं है, उसके पास कोई एक्सपोजर एक्सपीरियंस नहीं है, तो वो सिर्फ अपनी इंट्यूशन से हर वक्त शायद लोगों को ना लेकर चल सके. इसी तरह परसीव्ड यूटिलिटी ऑफ एविडेंस के बारे में भी हमें इस बात का इदराक रखना है कि इस साइंटिफिक मेथोडोलॉजी ऑफ इन्वेस्टिगेशन से ऑब्वियसली वी कैन एक्सप्लोर न्यू एवेन्यूज, वी कैन एक्सप्लोर न्यू होराइजन्स, वी कैन एक्सप्लोर न्यू पर्सपेक्टिव्स, राइट, ताकि हम शवाहद इकट्ठे कर सकें, ताकि हम माजी के अंदर अवेलेबल तमाम डाटा को बेस बनाकर फ्यूचर के बारे में अपनी प्लानिंग को ज़्यादा कंक्रीट मानों में इस्टेब्लिश कर सकें. लाइकवाइज जब हम फ्यूचर ऑफ एविडेंस बेस्ड मैनेजमेंट की बात करते हैं तो सिस्टमैटिक रिव्यूज आर रिक्वायर्ड, और ऑब्वियसली उन सिस्टमैटिक रिव्यूज की डॉक्यूमेंटेशन, उनके डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन, उनका एनालिसिस होना, ये तमाम बातें हमारे लिए ज़रूरी होंगी. In the same context, there are certain lessons which we are learning from evidence-based practices and evidence-based management. The first lesson is that evidence-based management is not substitute of traditional leadership. The traditional leadership, which is talking about motivation, encouragement of the people, right communication with the people, trustworthiness with the people, with the followers, with the colleagues, ये सब चीजें हमने करनी हैं, लेकिन इसके साथ साथ एविडेंस बेस्ड मैनेजमेंट इज नॉट सब्स्टिट्यूट, दैट इज एडिशन टू व्हाट आवर ट्रेडिशनल थॉट यूज्ड टू बी. The second thing is कि evidence based management basically जब हम additional perspective में बात कर रहे हैं तो is more objective approach, figures and facts पर based, reason and logic पर based, सबूत पर based, ठीक है, concrete मायनों के अंदर बात करने के लिए आपके पास कोई measures हो, आपके पास स्कोर कार्ड्स हो, आपके पास डैशबोर्ड्स हो, आपके पास कैलकुलेशंस हो, आपके पास मैट्रिसेस हो, जिनको बुनियाद बनाकर हम अपने फैसले की ऑथेंटिसिटी, हम अपने फैसले की ऑप्टिमाइजेशन उसको इंश्योर कर सकें. सो एविडेंस बेस्ड इन्फ्लुएंस डिसीजन मेकिंग, ऑब्वियसली उससे हमारे फैसले जो हैं वो मुतासर होंगे, बिकॉज हमारे पास हिस्टोरिकल प्रेसिडेंट उन बातों का मौजूद है, हमारे पास कैलकुलेशंस मौजूद हैं, हमारे पास एविडेंसेस मौजूद है. लेकिन इस सारे पैराए में हम कहीं पर भी इंट्यूशन को इग्नोर नहीं कर रहे हैं, हम ट्रेडिशनल लीडरशिप स्टाइल को इग्नोर नहीं कर रहे हैं. आई एम अगेन एंड अगेन सेइंग कि ये सब कुछ इन एडिशन टू व्हाट यू आर ऑलरेडी डूइंग, वो हम बात कर रहे हैं कि वी हैव टू बी मोर कंक्रीट, वी हैव टू बी मोर सॉलिड, वी हैव टू बी मोर ऑब्जेक्टिव. Likewise, evidence-based management की जब हम बात करते हैं तो that is directly incorporated by the learning organizations. So learning organizations are the places जहां पर हमें evidence-based management practices वो technically नजर आती हैं. अब इस सारे फिनोमेना के अंदर जो लीडरशिप का रोल है वो ये है कि वो इस बात को इंश्योर करे कि there is लर्निंग ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, जिसको हम इन अदर वर्ड्स नाम देते हैं इंस्टीट्यूशनलाइजेशन का, जिसको हम एक नाम देते हैं एक ऐसे इदारे का which is not just an organization but rather it has become an institute. ओके, तो जब एक इंस्टीट्यूट डेवलप हो जाए जहां पर लर्निंग पर्सपेक्टिव मौजूद हो, जहां पर लर्निंग कल्चर और लर्निंग एनवायरनमेंट हो, जहां पर नॉलेज वर्कर हो, जहां पर नॉलेज प्रैक्टिसेस हो, जहां पर नॉलेज मैनेजमेंट हो, ये वो एनवायरनमेंट होगा जहां पर आपके लिए एविडेंस बेस्ड मैनेजमेंट के ऊपर बात करना वो ज्यादा आसान होगा, ज्यादा आसानी आप कर सकोगे. द रीजन बीइंग कि एविडेंस बेस्ड मैनेजमेंट का कहना ये है कि आपको हिस्टोरिकल तमाम पर्सपेक्टिव्स को मद्देनजर रखते हुए अपने फ्यूचर के बारे में सोचना है, एंड एट द सेम टाइम यू हैव टू हैव द कॉन्शियसनेस, यू हैव टू हैव एक्सप्लिसिट डेटा collection, and you have to be judicious not only in terms of your execution of the things but in your planning of the things as well. आपका distributive justice, आपका procedural justice, ये तमाम के तमाम जो justice perspectives हैं ये वहां पर actual terms के अंदर in true sense, in true आपका spirit के साथ वो मौजूद हों. So that is the basic outlook of the article जो मैंने इन चंद slides में आपके साथ discuss किया. Now I'm taking you to the discussion from Rob B. Briner. और रॉब बी ब्रेनर अब आपको खुद से ब्रीफ करेगा कि उसने इस सारे आर्टिकल के अंदर किस बात के ऊपर एम्फसिस वो किया है। तवज्जो से सारी डिस्कशन को सुनिएगा, एंड इट इज़ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट एंड वेरी लर्निंग लाइक क्लिप फॉर अस, जिसमें कि हम एक एविडेंस बेस्ड प्रैक्टिस को एक्चुअली ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस में कैसे इंप्लीमेंट किया जा सकता है इन टर्म्स ऑफ रॉब बी ब्राइनर, वो विजुअलाइज करेंगे। सो हियर आई गो।
Hello, what I want to try and talk about in the next few minutes now is what evidence-based practice means and how it's relevant to human resource management. Evidence-based practice is really designed to fix a problem which is regarded as quite a big problem that affects all professions and all practitioners. Everybody uses evidence in their practice. We all use evidence, information of different kinds when we come to make decisions as a professional. However, there's a couple of problems with that. The first problem is we tend to not use enough different sources of evidence. For example, we might rely just on our own experience, or we might rely just on a particular idea or piece of research. So we don't look right across different sources of evidence. The second problem is we don't critically appraise the quality of that evidence, and that's an essential part of evidence-based practice, where rather than just saying here is some information, we should always ask, can I trust this? How reliable is it? In the end, all information evidence has problems, has weaknesses, has limitations, and it's part of the job of an evidence-based practitioner to try and identify those and to think how trustworthy, how much should I really use this information I've got. So evidence-based practice is an idea that is a thing. It's a thing that now has spread across many different professions. It started around maybe 25 years ago in medicine, and what happened in medicine, it was originally developed as a teaching method. There was a view that the way in which medical practitioners were taught was quite poor, and that they weren't being given good quality scientific evidence about the problems they were dealing with. And indeed around that time, in the early 90s, some people felt that perhaps only 18 to 20% of all medical interventions were actually based on solid medical evidence. What that means is, in fact, that a lot of what medical practitioners were doing could be either harming patients in some way or just not really achieving very much, or possibly it did work, but they didn't know. And it kind of started a revolution within the medical profession. Since then, lots of other professions have adopted this as a model of a way of thinking about how you incorporate better quality evidence into your decision making. This goes from policing to social work, to educators, to conservationists, to policymakers, and perhaps most recently to management and to human resource management. So it really is a thing. It's a way of thinking about how you make decisions. So what actually is evidence-based practice in the context of HR? There are kind of 6 steps to thinking about doing evidence-based practice. The first step is you ask a question. You say, what is going on here? What is happening? What is the problem? The second step is that you acquire and pull together information that's going to help you answer that question. The third is that you critically appraise, going back to this point I made before, you make a judgment about the quality of that evidence. You then aggregate it, which means you pull it together in some way, you apply it, and then you evaluate and look at the extent to which you've actually achieved your goals. And most importantly, this 6-stage process actually is done both for the problem itself and also for the solution. So a tendency, I think, in lots of fields of practice, particularly in HR, is what some people call solutioneering. That is, you have an idea of a solution, which might be talent management or performance management, and then you somehow fit the problem onto that apparent solution or intervention. And this is usually quite a big mistake. It's always key is to start off with the problem you actually have. So evidence-based practice is really the conscientious, explicit and judicious use of different sources of evidence. Conscientious means you try, explicit means you actually write it down, you communicate the evidence you've got rather than just saying, I just know this won't work or I just know it will. And judicious again is making that judgment. So you make that kind of judgment around the evidence, and in the case of evidence-based practice, there are 4 main sources of evidence. The first source of evidence is your own experience as a manager. Now, you may be thinking as an HR manager, well, I don't have evidence, I have experience, why does that count? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Firstly, your experience of a particular problem may be very good quality and very relevant evidence. It may also be very poor quality and very irrelevant evidence, but whatever, it's important you look at that evidence because like it or not, you will be using it. For example, as an HR manager, you may believe that poor performance is caused by terrible line managers, and that's a very strong belief of yours. If you believe that, you will tend to go and get evidence and data that confirms that point of view. So examining and making explicit evidence from your experience is very important for that reason as well. The second source of data in evidence-based practice, in the case of HR management, is organisational data. So that might be facts and figures, statistics, and so on from your own organisation, maybe absence rates, maybe performance rates, maybe turnover of staff rates. That's data from your organisation, that's the second. The third area is stakeholders themselves. These are people like managers, employees, maybe customers, others who have a stake in the kinds of decision you're going to make as an HR manager. Who's going to be influenced by that? What do they think about it? What are their values around what you're going to do? And again, this is partly important for practical reasons. If you're going to implement a solution, if those stakeholders actually don't like it and don't want it, it's probably not going to work. It's also important for ethical reasons. People may have values around the way we manage organisations, the way you should treat people, that mean you should listen to those, even if the evidence is telling you that a particular intervention might work. The fourth kind of area of evidence is scientific evidence. And this in general is something that HR, I would say, many practitioners are not too good at. This is not particularly the practitioner's fault, this is often academics' fault. We produce research that is incomprehensible, sometimes irrelevant, and often very difficult to get at because it's locked up behind paywalls. But that's another important source of evidence. Why, for example, should you implement a particular program to manage performance without first saying, well, what is the scientific evidence around what performance means, how you assess performance, how you measure performance, and what is the evidence about which kinds of interventions are most likely to improve or increase performance, if that's the problem you particularly have. So scientific evidence is the fourth. So in a way, these four sources are kind of like buckets, the things you go into to try and find out what the evidence is. There may be other sources as well, but in the context of HR, they're usually the main four sources. So far, all this sounds like it makes sense. Nobody would argue and say, no, I don't like evidence-based practice, we shouldn't do it, it makes no sense, it's silly. Nobody basically disagrees that it's a bad idea. So why doesn't it happen? And this is a key point, I think, for lots of practitioners, including HR practitioners. Things get in the way. There's lots of things. I think the first thing that gets in the way are very strong beliefs people have about what's going on in their world. For example, Mark Twain said, it ain't what you know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. In other words, having beliefs which are completely untrue can actually cause a lot of problems when it comes to making decisions. In the context of HR, for example, typical HR managers, and I've tested this a few times, often believe, for example, that the rate at which people change jobs has been increasing. But if you look, for example, at US and UK data, the evidence suggests the rate at which people change jobs, or how long people stay in a job, has not only remained about the same for the last 20 years, it's actually slightly increased. And again, another example of this is job satisfaction. People often believe that job satisfaction, again, in the last 15 to 20 years, has reduced. But in fact, again, if you look at the data, and this includes Norwegian data as well, actually, it has hardly changed in the last 15 or 20 years. So if you are a manager, an HR manager, and you have the assumption, for example, that people are trying to quit all the time and that people are very unhappy, you will take different kinds of actions to if you don't believe that. So exposing, doing some of this myth busting is an important part of evidence-based practice because those myths get in the way of actually seeking and finding out what might be going on. That's the first thing. The second thing that gets in the way, and there are many more I'm not going to talk about today, but the second thing that gets in the way is management fads and fashions. It seems to me, and it's true again of other fields, that HR is a field that is very, very full of fads and fashions. From things like emotional intelligence to certain aspects of management development, things like performance management, performance appraisals, ideas come in and out within HR. Apparently new ideas turn out to be old ideas, and old ideas that are rejected sometimes turn out to be quite good ideas in the long term. So one of the things HR has to do is be very careful that when a new idea comes along, like big data or data analytics, it's actually a useful and helpful idea as opposed to just the latest bright, shiny thing that seems exciting and seems like a good idea. So again, fads and fashions are things that can get in the way of really taking an evidence-based approach. I think the third thing I'm going to talk about that gets in the way is power and politics. One of the main blockages, I think, to people using more evidence in organisations is it challenges traditional ways of thinking about power. If you're a very senior manager in an organisation, You probably got to be senior not by being such a great evidence-based manager or practitioner. You probably got to that position by being really good at politics. That means you know how to impress people, you say what people higher up want you to hear, you're very ambitious to get ahead in the organisation, and what you're particularly good at is doing stuff, not necessarily doing stuff that works. So there's a related concept here as a quick fix, and many people have experience of working in organisations with managers who are promoted very rapidly, and indeed they do a lot of stuff. Is that stuff any good? Sometimes not so much, and they can leave a trail of destruction behind them, but nonetheless be promoted very quickly because they're very good at making things happen. Evidence-based practice means you can challenge some of that behaviour and say, why are we making that decision? Let's look at the evidence, what's going on. And in a way, it's nothing to do with status or authority. Potentially, anybody from any position, hierarchical position in the organisation can challenge and say, well, what's the evidence for this? What's the question? So I think power and politics is something else that gets in the way. And there's lots of other things as well, including, for example, the training of HR professionals. Are they trained in an evidence-based way? And generally not. I think some management consultancies are very useful. I think some management consultancies are quite poor in this context, as they do tend to promote and generate fads. So there's a whole range of things that get in the way. And it's important to think about those because evidence-based practice makes sense to most people. If we can think about what gets in the way, there's more chance of doing it. So finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what you as an individual or an organisation can do if you want to practice HR in a more evidence-based way. I think the first thing is healthy skepticism. I think it's very important in any professional activity to really question the information you're being given, whether that question is from your line manager, whether it's from what your employees say, whether it's what a professor tells you. It doesn't really matter where it's from, but you should say, what does that mean? Can I trust it? Should I really believe it? Have they got some vested interest in telling me this particular piece of information or story? So being healthy skeptical is a starting point. I think another very good starting point for individuals and organisations is to encourage the use of the word or the question why. Ask why. Why are we implementing this program? Why are we doing this thing? Why are we not doing this? What is the actual reason for this? And is that reason based on any explicit evidence we can actually have a discussion about and start to judge the quality of it? Or is it just somebody's pet idea? So asking why is very useful as well. I think also on an organisational level, I think there's lots of things teams of HR people can do. One is that whenever they're planning some new kind of intervention or they think they've identified a problem, is to go through the 6 steps I talked about and to actually go through the 4 sources of evidence. So for example, if you as an organisation feel you have a problem with absence, that your absence maybe is too high, you can do this for the problem. You can look at the organisational data, well, what is the absence problem? You can look at the scientific evidence, well, what does that say are the causes of absence and actually the most likely solutions? You can ask stakeholders why they think there may or may not be an absence problem, and you can also look at, as a team at your own professional expertise. Now, for any of those sources of evidence, there might be lots of evidence, it may be highly reliable, it may be highly relevant, it might be very, very unhelpful, not reliable at all. But nonetheless, going through that process is important, both in terms of identifying, in this case, an absence problem, and also identifying what the likely solutions are going to be. So you can literally sit in a team of people and actually discuss problems, discuss ideas, discuss things you'd like to do by going through that process. That's one way of doing it as a team. But I think more broadly, and this is both, I think, an individual and an HR issue, and indeed an issue for the whole profession. I think all of us, whatever profession we're in, and I'm in a profession too, I'm an academic, I'm an educator, I think it's very important to ask a fundamental question. Is it important or satisfying just to do things and to do stuff, or do you want to do what is more likely to get the results you want? If you want to do things that are more likely to get the results you want, it seems to me evidence-based practice and the frameworks that have been developed over the last 25 years are a very good place to start thinking about how you can be more effective as a professional and as an HR manager.
Okay, Ji, we have just gone through the detail by Professor Rob Briner, and we have seen कि किस तरीके से evidence को हम base बना सकते हैं for our future development. At the same time, एक और बड़ी important चीज़ इसमें हम add up कर सकते हैं कि supposedly if the leader is there and the leader is explicit and leader is judicious and the leader is conscientious, तो होगा ये कि supposedly if the leader leaves, तो उसके पीछे जो चीज़ रह जाएगी, that will be the evidences. ओके उससे हमारा जो नॉलेज बिल्डिंग का पर्सपेक्टिव है वो बेहतर तौर पर इस्टेब्लिश वो हो सकता है, बिकॉज हमारे पास उसके किए हुए फैसले, उसकी कही हुई बातें, उसके इरादे, उसके डिसीजन मेकिंग, उसकी क्रिएटिविटी, उसकी इनोवेशन, उन तमाम चीज़ों के बारे में शवाहिद जो हैं वो मौजूद होंगे. So evidence is not something like adabra kadabra. It's not a magic stick. That is basically आपका शेयरिंग ऑफ नॉलेज है, आपका इंफॉर्मेशन कलेक्शन है. चीजों को क्वेश्चन करना आना चाहिए, आपको वाई पूछना आना चाहिए कि अगर कोई काम आपको कहा जा रहा है तो वो काम आप क्यों परफॉर्म करो, या अगले बंदे के पास ये कैपेबिलिटी हो कि वो आपको एक्सप्लेन कर सके कि वाई एंड हाउ एंड व्हाट समथिंग इज टू बी डन. ओके सो लकीर का फकीर नहीं होना चाहिए. वी शुड नॉट बी ऑलवेज देयर टू बीट अबाउट द बुश, जिसमें हमें कोई फायदा नहीं हो रहा, जिसमें हमें कोई प्रोस्पेक्टिव नजर नहीं आ रहा, जिसमें हमारी ऑब्जेक्टिविटी मीट नहीं हो रही, जिसमें हमें सब्जेक्टिव आंसर्स भी अवेलेबल नहीं हो रहे हैं. तो हमें बेसिकली चीजों को टेक्निकल ग्राउंड्स पर स्टैब्लिश करने की वो जरूरत है. और जब तक हम उन चीजों को टेक्निकल ग्राउंड्स पर स्टैब्लिश नहीं करेंगे, हमारे लिए डिफिकल्ट हो जाएगा ये जानना कि हमने किसी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन की डेवलपमेंट में अपना रोल क्या अदा करना है. सो रोल क्लैरिटी वहां पर होना, रोल्स को एलैबोरेट करना, जॉब डिस्क्रिप्शंस का बयान होना, ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को अपने प्रोसेसेस एंड प्रैक्टिसेस को इस्टेब्लिश करना, इन तमाम चीज़ों की ज़रूरत है, जिसके लिए हम इस एविडेंस बेस्ड प्रैक्टिस की सारी जो डिटेल है उसको वो गो थ्रू कर रहे हैं. Obviously, इस आर्टिकल के अंदर they have also talked about different examples, जिसमें कि उन्होंने practitioner expertise and judgment, evidence from the local context, इन चीज़ों को elaborate किया in terms of innovation exploration. कि जब आप इनोवेशन की बात भी करते हो तो इनोवेशन सिर्फ प्रोडक्ट में नहीं है, इनोवेशन प्रोसेसेस में भी है, इनोवेशन एटीट्यूड्स में भी है, इनोवेशन बिहेवियर्स में भी है, इनोवेशन के बहुत से कॉन्टेक्स्ट हैं जिस पे कि हम बात अपनी वो कर सकते हैं. लाइकवाइज इस आर्टिकल के अंदर लीडरशिप एंड मैनेजमेंट के डिफरेंसेस के ऊपर भी वो बात की गई. जैसा उसने कहा कि मैनेजमेंट इज जनरली एसोसिएटेड विद pragmatism of ensuring that an organization functions, whereas by contrast leadership is more concerned with coping with and leading change, setting strategy, and the aspirational aspects of organizational development. Likewise, when I was going through the article, there was another very important expression in the article which says that the belief that leaders are themselves a special breed places a social pressure on them. हम अक्सर औकात लीडर को सुपरलेटिव डिग्रीज पर ले जाते हैं, हम अक्सर औकात लीडर को मोर देन हिज और हर कैपेबिलिटी वो इमेजिन करना शुरू कर देते हैं. तो नतीजा क्या निकलता है कि दैट पुट्स द पर्सन इन अ लॉट ऑफ प्रेशर within the organization to maintain the perception of both their superiors and subordinates alike, and their decision making processes and behaviors are the result of intuition, gut feeling, or simply knowing what to do and when to do it. अब इन तमाम बातों के पस मंजर में ऑब्वियसली लीडर को इस काबिल होना चाहिए कि वो वहां पर अपनी बात को रीजन और लॉजिक के साथ एलैबोरेट वो कर सके, और वो रीजन और लॉजिक के साथ एलैबोरेट तभी कर पाएगा व्हेन the person is having the capability of becoming advocate for the evidence, और उसके जो हमने बकिया पैमाने वो सारे देखे. अब एडवोकेसी के हवाले से भी एडवोकेसी कैन बी facilitated by the adoption of an interactionist style which encourages a constant and informed interchange of professional information among colleagues without the restrictions of hierarchy and formal authority. तो इस बात की हमें एक और जो एविडेंस भी हम आपस में भी एविडेंस कलेक्ट कर रहे हैं, इस आर्टिकल से भी हम एविडेंस ले रहे हैं कि हम हायरार्किकल जो लाइंस हैं हम उनको एज सच नहीं मानते व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट टीम्स, व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट ग्रुप्स, व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट एविडेंस टू परफॉर्म समथिंग. ओके तो ये हायरार्किकल लिमिट सिर्फ काम को डिफरेंट लेवल्स के ऊपर परफॉर्म करने के लिए है. अदरवाइज द पीपल आर फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल ह्यूमन बीइंग्स एंड दे शुड बी इंटरेक्टिंग विद वन अनदर फॉर द बेटरमेंट ऑफ their well-being, for the betterment of the organization as a whole. Okay, so इसी तरह leaders can become more collectors and providers of evidence. ये उसका एक बड़ा important aspect जो अभी हमने अपने सेशन में भी डिस्कस वो किया. Therefore, इस सारी डिस्कशन से हम इस कंक्लूजन पर पहुंचना चाहते हैं कि आपको रीजन, लॉजिक, आपको कंक्रीट ग्राउंड्स, आपको जो शवाहिद चाहिए अपने फैसलों के लिए, उन सबको इकट्ठा करना ये जिम्मेदारी होगी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के तमाम मेंबरान की। हमें एक ऐसा कल्चर डेवलप करना है, हमें एक ऐसी इन्वायरमेंट एस्टेब्लिश करनी है जहां पर लर्निंग पर्सपेक्टिव्स के साथ हम अपनी डेवलपमेंट को मटीरियलाइज वो कर सकें। इस सारी डिस्कशन के और भी बहुत से टेक्निकल पहलू हैं जिनके ऊपर इंशाल्लाह हम बात करेंगे आफ्टर अ शॉर्ट ब्रेक, एंड वी आर गोइंग टू सी ईच अदर शार्प एट 7:40, राइट जी। 7:40 पर इंशाल्लाह हम अपने सेशन को रिज्यूम करेंगे और वहां से इंशाल्लाह हम अपनी डिस्कशन को आगे चलाएंगे कि इसकी प्रैक्टिकल मैनिफेस्टेशन ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस के अंदर वो किस तरह से की जा रही हैं। जज़ाकल्लाह खैर फॉर दिस सेशन।